The bell at Saint Aldhelm's had not rung, and that was how Philippa Coldwell knew, before anyone came to tell her, that this was the second time. She stood at the schoolroom window with a stick of chalk still in her hand, watching the empty lane that ran up from the church, and counted the silence the way she had counted it 2 months before. 6 children sat behind her, waiting for a sum she had stopped midline. None of them asked why she had gone still at the glass. In a village this size they already knew. Her wedding gown hung behind the door of Mrs. Heddon's front room, sleeves still pinned where the seamstress had left them, waiting a second time for a wedding that had not happened. Down at the church, 40 guests would be finding their own way home in their good coats, and somewhere among them, the Duke of Penhale would be offering an explanation that fit in a single sentence and satisfied no one.
Mrs. Heddon says the roof of the tenant cottage came down in the night, that the Duke rode out before dawn to see the Wexler family safely housed, and simply lost the hour.
Philippa said it to the window glass, not to the children, and her voice came out flat and practiced. The voice of a woman reciting a story she has already decided not to believe twice. The eldest of the children, a solemn boy of 9 named Tobias, slid off his bench and came to stand beside her at the glass, looking out at the same empty lane. Tobias said, "My mother says a duke who cannot keep an hour cannot keep a wife either. Mrs. Coldwell, I told her that was unkind of her to say."
Your mother is entitled to her opinion, Tobias, and so I think am I. Go and finish your sum. Numbers do not care what the church bell did or did not do this morning, and neither for the next quarter hour, will you?
She set the chalk down, gathered herself the way she had learned to gather herself in the 3 years since her first husband's ship went down with all hands somewhere off the Azores, and turned back to the room with a steadiness that cost her more than any of the children could guess. She had promised herself, walking to church the first time, that whatever happened she would not become the sort of woman the village pitied over tea, and she meant to keep that promise even now, with the second silence still ringing in her ears louder than any bell had ever rung. Hugh Ellery came on foot, which Mrs. Heddon said afterward was the first sign of how badly he wanted to be forgiven, because a duke who arrives on foot has walked past his own carriage on purpose. He stood in the doorway of the schoolroom with his hat in both hands and mud on his boots from the collapsed cottage, and for a moment he only looked at her, the way a man looks at a debt he cannot pay in the coin the creditor wants.
I know what a second time looks like from where you were standing. I'm not going to stand here and make it sound smaller than it was.
Then don't stand here at all. Say what you came to say, or go back to your roof and your tenants, who at least had the decency to need you for a reason I can see with my own eyes.
The children had gone home an hour before. It was only the 2 of them now, and the smell of chalk dust, and the gown behind the door that neither of them looked at directly.
The Wexler roof came down with 3 children under it. I could not leave until I had seen them out and the youngest one breathing easy. I would make the same choice again tonight, and I think you would too if you're honest with yourself.
I believe you. That is the trouble, Hugh. I believe every single reason you have ever given me, one at a time, and each one is a good reason, and together they have cost me 2 wedding days and whatever is left of my standing in this parish.
He crossed the room then, slow enough that she could have stepped back, and did not. He stopped close enough that she could see the exhaustion under his eyes, the kind that comes from more than one bad night.
Give me a 3rd date. Not for the parish, not for my aunt, not for anyone counting the church bells. For me, because I'm asking you plainly, with nothing collapsing anywhere to blame it on.
You said something very like that the first time as well, almost those same words, standing in almost the same spot, with your hat in your hands the same way.
Then let me say something I have not said before. I do not fully understand why I keep losing hours I mean to keep. I know that is not an answer that satisfies you, and it does not satisfy me either. But I would rather tell you the truth of my own confusion than invent a tidier lie.
That admission cost him something visible, a small crack in the composed face the Count he was used to, and Philippa saw it, and it was the only reason she did not ask him to leave outright.
The 14th, then. 2 weeks from today. I will wear the same gown. I will not have a new one made for a wedding I'm not yet certain will happen, and I will not pretend to you that I'm not frightened of a third silence.
He flinched at that, just slightly, and she let him. Some hurts, she had decided, were owed, and she was no longer in the business of sparing him the ones he had earned honestly. The market at Thornmere sold fish, wool, and opinions in roughly equal measure, and by market day the whole square had an opinion about the Duke of Penhale's bride. Philippa felt it in the way conversation stopped a beat too late as she passed the butter stall, in the too bright smile of the vicar's wife, in the particular silence of a woman who has decided not to say the cruel thing aloud but wants credit for having thought it. Mrs. Odell, who kept the good linen shop and had opinions about everyone's trousseau whether asked or not, found Philippa near the fish stalls and did not trouble to lower her voice for the benefit of the women browsing the same stall. Mrs. Odell said a man does not forget his own wedding twice unless some part of him is trying very hard to remember something else instead, and that a woman with any sense would ask herself what that something else might be before she let it happen a third time.
I will thank you to let me worry about my own sense, Mrs. Odell, and I will thank you twice over for the fish, since that is at least an honest transaction between us.
She said it evenly, chin level, and walked the rest of the square with her basket steady, though her hand shook once she had turned the corner out of sight, and she stood a full minute with her back against the churchyard wall before she trusted herself to go on. She found Mrs. Hedden waiting at the corner by the well, arms crossed, already furious on her behalf before Philippa had said a single word about it. Mrs. Hedden said she had heard the whole thing from the cheese stall and had almost spoken up herself, which anyone who knew her would understand was rare indeed.
Say nothing. She is only saying aloud what half the parish is already thinking quietly, and I would rather know what is being thought than be the last to hear it from someone kinder.
They walked together toward the vicarage lane, past the churchyard wall, and Mrs. Hedden glanced sideways at her the way an old friend does when she suspects there is more news coming than has yet been shared. Philippa had that look about her again, Mrs. Hedden said, the one she had worn the week after Edmund's ship went down, when she had already decided what to do before telling a living soul.
I wrote to my late husband's cousin in Yorkshire 3 weeks ago, before the second date even failed. She keeps a girls' school near Harrogate and needs a companion mistress for the younger boarders. The post is mine if I write back and accept it before the month is out.
Mrs. Hedden stopped in the middle of the lane, her hand tightening hard on Philippa's arm. Mrs. Hedden said Philippa had never once mentioned it, not in 3 weeks of supper together every night.
Because saying it aloud would have made it a plan instead of a precaution, and I was not yet ready to know which one it was. I'm still not certain which. But the letter is in my writing desk, and it is not going anywhere, and neither, for the moment, am I.
She said it steadily, but there was a new weight to her now that had not been there a week ago, the weight of a woman who has quietly built herself a door out of a room before anyone has told her she must leave it. She sat at the little desk by candlelight long after the house had gone quiet, the unfinished letter to Harrogate spread before her, and read her own half-written acceptance 3 times over without adding a single new word to it. The candle burned down an inch while she sat there, turning the pen over in her fingers, listening to the house settle around her and to something in her own chest that would not settle at all. She thought of the boathouse smell of tar and rope waiting somewhere ahead of her that she did not yet know was coming. Though she could not have named what she was waiting for, she thought only that 2 weeks felt, in that quiet hour, like both far too long and nowhere near long enough. In the end, she folded the letter closed without signing it, set it back in the drawer beneath her handkerchiefs, and blew out the candle. It was not a decision. It was only, she told herself, not yet a decision, which was a different thing altogether, and she went to bed believing that distinction would hold. If you are listening to this on a walk of your own, I wonder what sound is closest to you right now. The wind through a hedge, rain on a window, or nothing at all. Just the particular quiet of a place that has gone still around you the way that Market Square went still around Philippa. Tell me in the comments, so I know where you are while this story keeps unfolding. And while you're there, a like helps this find the ears of someone else who might need a story like this one tonight. Hugh had asked her to come with him to see old Mrs. Farrow. who lived alone above the tide flats and had taken a fall on her step. And Philippa had gone because the vicar was laid up with a chill, and someone with a steady hand needed to look at the wound. The sky had been the color of a bruise since noon, and by the time they had bandaged the old woman's arm and started back along the cliff path, the first fat drops were already striking the gorse around their feet. The storm came in off the sea faster than either of them had judged possible, and within a quarter mile the rain had turned from a nuisance into something that stung the skin and blotted out the road ahead.
There is a boathouse below the second bend. Old Tam Ruskin keeps it for his lobster pots. We will not make Thornmere in this, not safely, not with the light already failing.
They half ran, half stumbled down the wet path, and reached the low stone boathouse just as the wind found its full strength, driving the rain sideways in sheets that rattled the single-shuttered window. Inside smelled of tar and old rope and the sea itself, and there was barely room for the two of them among the coiled lines and the upturned dinghy, close enough that Philippa could feel the warmth coming off him through her soaked sleeve. Neither of them spoke for a long while. The storm did the talking, drumming on the roof, and somewhere outside a loose shutter banged twice against its frame and went quiet.
You are shivering.
So are you.
He laughed at that, short and surprised, as though he had forgotten he was allowed to, and shrugged out of his coat despite her protest and settled it over her shoulders anyway, his hands lingering a moment too long at her collar before he made himself step back.
You are always doing that, giving something away and then stepping back before I can thank you for it properly, as though the thanking itself were a debt you would rather not collect.
Perhaps it is easier to give a coat than to explain why I need to give it. I have never been especially good at the second part, Philippa. You have noticed that about me by now, I think.
She studied him in the dim light, water still dripping from the ends of her hair, and something in his face made her stay very still and wait, sensing that if she pushed too hard he would close again like a door.
There's a road along this stretch that floods at high tide. Not this one, the lower one, along the causeway. I have not driven it after dark in 9 years. Not once, and I have never told anyone. Why? Not my aunt, not Griggs, not a living soul in this county.
Philippa went very still, sensing the shape of something enormous standing just behind his words, close enough to touch.
You do not have to tell me tonight. I am not asking you to hand it all to me in one storm, just because we happen to be sheltering from the same rain.
I know I don't have to. That is why I almost did, and why I find I cannot quite finish the sentence even now, with you standing this close and looking at me the way you're looking at me.
He looked at her for a long moment in the dim light, through the shutter cracks, something raw moving behind his eyes, and then, instead of the words, he reached up and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek, his thumb resting a moment against her jaw. When he kissed her, it was not the careful, dutiful kiss of a man performing an engagement. It was the kiss of a man who has spent 9 years keeping every door in himself locked and has just, without quite deciding to, turned one key. Philippa kissed him back with a fierceness that surprised her, one hand fisted in the front of his damp shirt, and for a little while the storm outside and the storm in her own chest were the only two things in the world. They stayed in the boathouse until the worst of the rain passed, past midnight by Hugh's pocket watch, and walked back into Thornmere in the grey hour before dawn, her hand tucked into his arm, both of them silent in a way that felt, for once, like peace rather than distance. They lingered a moment at the garden gate before he had to ride back to Penhale for the morning's business, neither of them quite ready to let the quiet of the night end. The sky had cleared to a pale, washed gray, and somewhere behind the hedge a blackbird had already begun singing as though the storm had never happened at all.
Whatever it was you almost told me last night, I would still like to hear it when you are ready. Not because I am owed it, but because I think you might need to say it to someone who is not carrying it for you out of duty.
Soon. I promise you soon, Philippa. I only need to find the courage to say it in daylight, which has always been harder for me than saying it in the dark.
He kissed her knuckles, formal and old-fashioned, and somehow more intimate for it than the kiss in the boathouse had been, and rode away before either of them had to name what had shifted between them overnight. Lady Vane arrived by carriage before the mud from the coast road had even dried on her own nephew's boots, and asked to see Philippa alone, in a tone that made plain the request was not really a request at all. Mrs. Hedden showed her into the front room and then, at a look from Philippa, withdrew to the kitchen, though she left the door open a deliberate 3 inches. Lady Vane did not sit. She stood by the cold hearth in her traveling cloak, surveying the modest room, the mended curtains, the schoolroom slate still propped by the window, with the particular composure of a woman cataloguing a life she considers beneath her nephew. Lady Vane said she would speak plainly, since plain speaking was the only courtesy she had time for that morning, and that whatever had occurred last night in the boathouse, however innocent, could not happen again before the vows were spoken. Her nephew's name, she said, had weathered a great deal already, and would not weather a third scandal attached to Philippa's own.
I was caught in a storm while nursing a fallen woman's arm, Lady Vane, at your nephew's own request. If that is scandal enough to trouble you, I wonder that you have survived 40 years in this county at all.
Something flickered behind Lady Vane's composed face, not quite approval, but not quite its opposite either. Lady Vane said Philippa had a sharper tongue than she had expected from a purser's widow, and would own as much, but sharpness would not carry her through what was coming if Hugh failed her a third time. The parish, she said, had already decided what a third failure would mean, and she would rather spare Philippa the hearing of it from strangers.
Then say it yourself, since you have clearly come prepared to.
Lady Vane said they would call Philippa never good enough to hold him in the first place, and say he had known it all along and lacked the courage to admit it sooner. She was not certain, she admitted, that she believed that of her nephew, or certain any longer that she believed it of Philippa either. But she had watched this county destroy kinder women for smaller failures than a third abandoned wedding. Philippa held her gaze without flinching, though the words landed just where they were meant to land, and something old and tired in her rose up to answer them anyway.
Then I suppose we shall find out together, Lady Vane, whether your nephew has the courage you say you are not certain of. I cannot make that choice for him. I have already made every choice that was mine to make, and I do not intend to make it twice.
Lady Vane studied her a long moment, then inclined her head, the smallest fraction, the closest thing to respect the room was likely to see from her that morning. Ready or not, Lady Vane told her. The 14th would come regardless, and no one would say afterward that the delay had been Philippa's. She left as abruptly as she had arrived, and Philippa stood alone in the front room for a long moment afterward, listening to the carriage wheels recede down the lane, before Mrs. Hedden came back in from the kitchen with 2 cups of tea she had clearly been holding ready the entire time. Mrs. Hedden set the tea down and studied Philippa's face for a long moment before she spoke. Mrs. Hedden asked whether she was packing that trunk yet.
No, not yet. I find I would rather see whether he crosses his own road before I decide I have to cross mine.
Mrs. Hedden nodded slowly and said nothing further, and the 2 of them sat a while in the small front room with their tea going cold, listening to the ordinary sounds of the lane outside as though nothing at all unusual had happened that morning. The story of the Duke and his bride caught out all night in a storm reached the breakfast table at Penhale House before Hugh had even washed the salt from his hair, carried there by a stable boy who had seen them come up the drive at dawn. Lady Vane, Hugh's aunt and the only mother he had known since he was 12, met him in the breakfast room with her mouth set in the thin line she used for matters of family honor. Lady Vane said that half the county would have the story embroidered into something scandalous by supper, that a duke's unmarried bride caught out all night, however innocently, was the kind of talk that could not be allowed to sit unaddressed. The wedding, she said, must go forward on the 14th as planned with no further delay of any kind, weather or otherwise. Hugh agreed with every word of it, and felt something cold settle in his stomach even as he said so, because agreement and readiness, he was beginning to understand, were not the same animal at all. He found himself, an hour later, standing at the window of his study with a letter to the bishop half written, a request to move the date back another fortnight, quill still wet, the old excuse already forming on his tongue about propriety and haste, and giving the parish no further cause for talk. He looked at the words on the page for a long time. Then he looked at his own hand, and at the small tear he had left in the corner of the paper without noticing, and made himself set the quill down.
No.
He said it aloud to the empty room, the way a man says a thing he needs to hear from his own mouth before he can trust it. He folded the letter in half, then in half again, and put it in the fire himself before Griggs could find it and act on habit. It was a small thing, a single letter unsent, but it was the first time in 9 years he had felt the old instinct rise in him and refused to let it drive. He rode over that evening himself, without an appointment and without an excuse, and found Philippa in the garden taking in washing before the light failed. He did not come empty-handed. He carried a small iron ring of keys, worn smooth with age, and held them out to her without a speech prepared in advance.
These are the household keys of Penhale. My mother carried them, and her mother before that. I meant to give them to you the morning after the wedding, the way it is always done. I find I would rather give them to you now before anything else can go wrong, so that whatever happens on the 14th, you already hold something that is truly yours.
Philippa took the keys, felt their unfamiliar weight settle cold and real in her palm, and searched his face for the meaning underneath the gesture, sensing it mattered more than he was saying aloud.
Hugh, what is it you are not telling me? You have circled it twice now, in the boathouse, and again just now, and both times you have stopped a breath short of saying it.
Ask me again after the 14th, I promise you an answer then. Whatever else happens between now and that morning, I only need a little more time to find the right words for it.
You keep asking for a little more time, Hugh. I hope you understand why that particular request frightens me more than any other one you could make.
He flinched, and reached for her hand, and held it a long moment without answering, because he had no honest reply that did not require the very confession he was not yet ready to give. She let it go, though it cost her something to do it, and slipped the ring of keys into her apron pocket, where she could feel it against her hip the whole walk back into the house. The church filled early, 40 guests becoming nearly 60 this time, drawn as much by curiosity as goodwill. All of them watching the door with the particular attention of people who half expect to witness a disaster and do not want to miss it. Philippa stood in the vestry in her gown, the same one, sleeves still bearing the faint pin marks from the first fitting, and watched the church clock through the narrow window as the appointed hour came and passed. 10 minutes became 20. Mrs. Hedden stood beside her, gripping her hand hard enough to hurt, saying nothing, because there was nothing left to say that would not sound like a lie. Mrs. Hedden offered to take the trap to Penhale herself and be back before anyone noticed she had gone.
No. If he is not already on the road, seeing you arrive will only tell him I sent someone to fetch him, and I will not have that between us either. Not today, not after everything else.
The clock ticked past the half hour, and the murmuring in the pews behind the vestry door had taken on a particular quality Philippa recognized from 2 months before, the sound of pity curdling slowly into entertainment. Hugh stood in the front hall in his wedding clothes, carriage waiting at the door, and could not make his feet cross the threshold. It was the church bell that had done it, ringing out across the fields to call the parish to witness, the same bell, the same hour of morning, 9 years to the week since another bell had rung for another wedding that never came. He had been 25 years old, standing on this same front step, when word came that Cecilia Marsh's mother had taken a turn for the worse 3 miles up the coast, past the lower causeway that flooded twice a day with the tide. Cecilia had come to him that same hour, cloak already fastened, determined to go to her mother's bedside that very night rather than wait for morning. Hugh had told her the water would not clear the crossing until first light, that the current there ran strong enough to take a carriage wheel out from under a horse, and had asked her more than once to wait only until dawn. Cecilia had said that a daughter does not sit warm by a fire counting hours while her mother dies alone, and that she would rather risk the water than risk arriving too late to say goodbye. Hugh, God forgive him, had let her go rather than forbid her outright, because forbidding a grieving woman felt, at the time, like its own kind of cruelty. The carriage had gone into the flooded causeway not a quarter-mile from Penhale's own gates, in the dark, in water that had risen higher and faster than either of them had judged it would. By the time the search party found the overturned carriage at first light, there was nothing left to do but carry her home. Hugh had told himself for 9 years that her death was her own choice, made against his wishes, and some cold, true part of him had always known that was only half the story. He was the one who had asked her to wait rather than forbid the crossing outright. He had never once in 9 years said that sentence aloud to a living soul. Griggs found him there, unmoving in the front hall, carriage horses stamping in the drive, and did not ask twice why a bridegroom was not moving toward his own wedding. The church was waiting, Griggs said, had been waiting the better part of an hour now, and would not wait much longer before the waiting itself became the story the whole county told.
I cannot make my legs carry me through that door, Griggs. I do not know how to explain that to you in any way that will not sound like madness to a sensible man.
Griggs said to explain it to him then, the way he had never explained it to anyone, because he had watched Hugh refuse every road after dark, every causeway crossing, every morning hour that echoed that one, for 9 years. He had never once asked why, he said, out of respect for a grief his master had never named, not to him, not to anyone else in the house. Griggs said it steadily. An old servant's patience worn thin at last, and something in Hugh broke open at last, 9 years of carefully kept silence giving way all at once.
I told her to wait for the tide, Griggs. I asked her to wait, and she went anyway, and the water took her not a quarter-mile from this house. I have spent 9 years believing that if I only wait a little longer, ask a little more caution of everyone I love, no one else drowns on my account. And today I have done to Philippa Coldwell exactly what I did to Cecilia. I have asked her to wait, without ever saying so plainly, and I have very nearly lost her for it.
Griggs said he already knew the answer then. The road he had spent 9 years avoiding was not the one that had killed her. The one costing him Mrs. Coldwell now was the one he was standing on that very minute, refusing to walk. Hugh looked at his own front door as though seeing it clearly for the first time in 9 years, and something in his chest loosened at last, enough to let him move. In the vestry, Philippa listened to the church clock strike the half-hour and felt something inside her settle, quiet and final, like a door closing without slamming. She did not weep. She had promised herself that much at the very beginning, and she meant to keep the promise even now, with the whole parish waiting outside to see whether she would. Whatever she decided next, Mrs. Hedden told her, she owed this parish no performance of grace while they watched her be humiliated a third time. She did not have to do this.
I know I don't. I'm not doing it for the parish, Margaret. I'm doing it because I have decided sitting in this room exactly what I am no longer willing to accept, and I find I would rather show them that than hide from it.
She walked out of the vestry and down the center of the church, past 60 faces turned toward her in a silence so complete she could hear her own hem brushing the stone floor, and stopped at the altar rail where the vicar stood helpless with his prayer book still open.
There will be no wedding today. I will not stand at this rail a third time to be made a spectacle of. Whatever the Duke's reasons, they are his to carry, and I will no longer carry the shame of them in front of this parish on his behalf.
She reached up and drew the veil back from her face, folded it once, and laid it on the altar rail itself, deliberate and unhurried, the way a woman sets down a weight she has decided she is finished holding. Then she walked back down the aisle, past Mrs. Hedden's stricken face, past Mrs. Odell's poorly hidden satisfaction, out through the church doors into the ordinary daylight, and did not look back once. There is a particular kind of courage in walking away from a room full of people who expect you to fall apart, and choosing instead to leave, upright, with your own 2 feet carrying you somewhere better. It costs more than anyone watching ever understands, and it is very rarely given the credit it deserves. Philippa did not go home. She went straight to the Anchor, where the afternoon mail coach for the North Road left twice a week, and paid for a seat to Harrogate with money she had set aside months before, in case precaution ever became necessity. The innkeeper's wife, who had heard every version of the morning's events already from 3 separate customers, packed her a small parcel of bread and cheese without being asked and said nothing at all, which Philippa was grateful for beyond words. Her trunk sent ahead that morning on Mrs. Heddon's insistence in case of just this outcome was already being loaded onto the coach roof. She stood in the yard in her wedding gown, having had no other clothes to hand, and watched the horses being backed into their traces. Hugh did not wait for the carriage to be readied. He took his own horse, the fastest in the stable, and rode for Thornmere along the Upper Coast Road at a pace Griggs said afterward he had never seen the Duke attempt in 9 years. Not even in daylight, not even on dry ground. The lower causeway lay half a mile to his right, the whole way, visible now and then between the hedges. The very road that had taken Cecilia, and every stride of the horse carried him closer to the place he had spent 9 years riding around rather than through. At the fork where the roads split, the upper safe way and the lower direct one, his horse checked and nearly took the old habitual turn on its own, trained by 9 years of the same choice made every single time. He did not let it. He turned the horse's head hard toward the lower road, toward the causeway itself, and for one held breath felt the old cold fear rise in his chest, the way it always had, before something new rose up underneath it and refused to yield the ground. The tide was out, the crossing dry and solid under the horse's hooves, and he crossed it at a full gallop for the first time in 9 years, waterbirds scattering up from the flats on either side. He felt something in his chest loosen further with every length of ground the horse covered, as though outrunning his own caution might, for once, be the thing that saved someone instead of costing them. He reached the top of Thornmere's High Street just as the mail coach guard called the final boarding, and threw himself off the horse before it had fully stopped. He ran the last 100 yards on foot through the market square in his ruined wedding clothes, past every stall that had gossiped about him for a fortnight. Philippa had one foot on the coach step when she heard her name and turned to find Hugh Ellery standing in the yard, breathless, mud to the knee, no hat, no coat, looking nothing at all like a duke.
You do not get to arrive like this and expect it to undo this morning. I have heard your reasons before, Hugh. Every one of them was good. None of them were the truth.
She turned back toward the coach step, her hand tightening on the rail, and for one terrible moment he thought she meant to climb up and leave him standing in the yard the way he deserved.
Then let me finally give you the truth here, in front of anyone who cares to listen, because I have hidden it from every soul I love for 9 years, and it has cost me everything it was meant to protect.
He said it loud enough that the coach guard stopped with his hand on the door, and the innkeeper's wife came to the doorway to watch. Half the market square that had gossiped its way through a fortnight now stood close enough to hear a duke say the thing he had never once said aloud.
9 years ago, I asked the woman I was to marry to wait until first light to cross a flooded road because I was afraid of the water, and she went anyway to reach her dying mother, and the causeway took her not a quarter mile from my own front door. I told myself for 9 years that asking someone to wait keeps them safe. Today I asked you to wait as well, without ever saying so plainly, and it very nearly cost me you in exactly the same way. I do not want to be a careful man anymore, Philippa. I want to be a man who crosses the road.
The yard had gone completely silent, even the horses standing still in their traces, and Philippa stood on the coach step with her hand still on the rail, searching his face for the first time without any wall left between them.
Words are easy in a public yard with an audience already gathered, Hugh. You crossed one road this morning. I need to know you mean to keep crossing it on every ordinary Tuesday with no one watching at all, not only on the mornings it costs you the most to fail.
Then take the room Mrs. Heddon has already paid for above the anchor tonight instead of the coach, and give me exactly one ordinary Tuesday to prove it to you with no wedding, no parish, and no audience at all. If I fail you on an unremarkable day when nothing forces my hand, you may take the very next coach north, and I swear before everyone standing in this yard that I will not follow you.
It was not a grand promise, It was a small, practical, unglamorous one, and that more than anything he had said was what made Philippa step down from the coach at last.
Say her name again. Not as a confession this
William
time.
Harding.
As a woman, you are allowed to have mourned out
Harding.
loud in front of people without it costing you the next 9 years as well.
Cecilia, her name was Cecilia Marsh, and I loved her, and I have grieved her badly and quietly for 9 years in a way that nearly cost me you, and I'm done doing it that way.
Philippa crossed the yard to him then, slow and deliberate, and took his face in both her hands, mud and all.
Then we will grieve her properly, together, and openly, and after that we will stop letting a road neither of us chose keep deciding our lives for us.
She kissed him there in the inn yard in front of the coach guard and the innkeeper's wife and half the gossiping square of Thornmere, and this time neither of them cared who was watching. Tobias was first through the door the next morning, breathless, having run the whole way from his mother's cottage, with the news already 3 streets ahead of him. Tobias asked whether it was true the Duke had ridden straight through the flooded road to catch her at the coach, since his uncle said the man had never crossed that causeway in 9 years, not once, not even in daylight.
It is true, Tobias. Every word of it, though I would ask you not to make it grander in the telling than it already was. He crossed a road he was afraid of. That is the whole of it, and it is enough.
Tobias said his mother called it the bravest thing anyone in the parish had done since old Mrs. Farrow fought off a bull with a washing paddle. Philippa laughed then, properly, for what felt like the first time in a fortnight, and the sound surprised her almost as much as it surprised the children watching her.
Go and sit down, all of you. We have sums to finish, and the bell for the church will ring again in 4 days' time, and this time, I promise you, it will ring for something worth hearing.
They were married on a Tuesday morning with no announcement beyond the banns already read, no 60 curious guests, only Mrs. Hedden, Griggs, and Lady Vane standing witness, and the bell rang out over the fields right on the hour, the first time in 3 tries that it had rung for anything at all. Philippa wore the same gown a 3rd time, sleeve pins and all, and told anyone who asked that she saw no reason to waste good silk on a story that had finally ended the way it was always meant to. That afternoon, instead of the usual wedding journey south toward the fashionable coast, Hugh drove her himself along the lower causeway road at an easy pace in full daylight and stopped the carriage at its midpoint to sit with her a while and watch the tide come in where it was meant to. He told her, at last, in his own unhurried words, and with no audience left to overhear it, everything about the year he had spent grieving Cecilia in silence. Philippa listened without once looking away, and when he finished, she did not offer him comfort so much as stayed, which was, he told her, comfort enough. They drove on to Penhale as the light went gold over the water, and the road behind them, for the first time in 9 years, was only a road. I knew a groundskeeper once, years ago, who kept the churchyard at a parish not unlike this one, and for the life of me I cannot bring his name back to mind tonight, though I can still see his hands, cracked and patient, pulling ivy off the old stones. It hardly matters. He used to say that grief left untold does not protect the people we love, it only postpones the reckoning, and hands the bill to someone who never agreed to pay it. I think of him whenever a story turns on a silence kept too long out of what looks, from the outside, like caution. Has there ever been a fear in your own life that you dressed up as carefulness, so that no one, including you, would have to call it by its real name? Tell me about it, if you are willing. I read every one of